I'm here in Valemount, BC at the beautiful home of author Maureen Brownlee on the occasion of the launch of her second novel, Cambium Blue, which I had the pleasure of reading last week. It tells the fascinatingly diverse stories of three characters: a young single mother, a widowed newspaper publisher, and an aged junk collector set in the fictional timber town of Beauty Creek in northern British Columbia, whose lumber mill has closed and which is now turning to a resort promoter to save the town. Right? Thanks for being here with me today, Maureen.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about your background for those who don't know you. Give people a chance to get to know you.
Sure. I was born in the McBride Hospital. My parents had a farm in Dunster, so I grew up in Dunster. I went to school in McBride. I moved away in the late 70s and came back in the sort of mid 80s and worked at a few different jobs, and then a friend and I decided to start a newspaper. So we founded what became the Valley Sentinel, and I ran the Valley Sentinel for 10 years, and then sold it, and tried to go back to school doing distance education through open learning, and then did that for a while, and all
tried.
that. Yeah, well, distance education is a whole other, particularly at that time. You would get videotapes of lectures and things like that. But I did take some English courses, and the really inspirational English course that I took through the Open Learning Institute was a 100 and 101 English literature, how did it go? English and First Nations literature, I think it was called. And so it was, 100 level English courses, but it was all First Nations literature. Lots of it was British Columbia First Nations literature. And it was really inspirational in the sense of paying attention to where you come from, and writing the stories that you know. So as a writer, it really made me think more about where I come from and the stories that I know. And and then life intervened, and we bought this ranch, and we spent a lot of time building fences. And I went to writing workshops, and in 2010, 2011, I won a scholarship to the Fernie Writing Conference, which was somewhat new at that time. And so it was a week-long course at the Fernie Writing Conference, and a chance to have Ulican Books, who had recently moved to Fernie, look at a manuscript. So I went to the Fernie Writers Workshop and worked with Andreas Schroeder, and he basically showed me how I could create my first novel out of the multitude of scraps that I had gathered. And so I had my first novel published with Ulican Books, and then I wrote the second book, and Ulican was interested in it, and then some things happened, and they were not moving forward. So I took the book back and resubmitted it, and it was picked up by Harbor Publishing in 2019, just in time for the pandemic.
Yeah, right.
And here we are.
Yes, and here we are 3 years later.
Exactly.
Nearly, right? Logger's Daughter was your first novel. I'm sure people are familiar with it. Released in 2013. So how did it take you 9 years? I mean, I understand COVID intervened, but 9 years is a long time between first and second novels.
It's true, it is. Well, so part of it was the whatever it was that went on at Ulican Books that I'm not privy to. So it was going to be coming out, and then it was going to be coming out, and it got bumped back a few times. So then it was probably 2016 when I decided that I was going to take it back and try something else. And when I decided to take it back, I decided that I would try to get an agent. So, which is a whole process. You query, so you decide which agents you think you might like to have, and you send them a letter saying who you are and what your book is about and that you'd like representation. And they say, okay, if you've done a good job on your query letter and they're interested, they'll ask to see the full manuscript. And that process can take months and months.
Right,
so it took almost a year. One agent said, yeah, I'm kind of interested, but would you consider having the book edited? So I did that. I had it edited. And that took another 6 months. And then the agent said, yeah, I don't think I can sell it. So then it took another year.
Yeah.
Then the process of sending it out to publishers is a similar kind of, you send out query letters, and if they're interested, they ask to see the manuscript. And that actually went more quickly than it might have, because I had 2 offers from different publishers. And when that happens, then you go back to, if you've done multiple submissions, which I had, you go back to everyone and say, I've had an offer to publish, which gives then all the other publishers an opportunity to say yay, nay, whatever.
Right.
So that moved along fairly quickly.
So there was, a bidding war.
No, there wasn't exactly a bidding war, but we can call it that. We can call it, but no, yeah, there wasn't exactly a bidding war, but there was interest.
Okay,
Yeah, there was more than one publisher who was interested, and I decided, but Harbor Publishing was quite interested, and and so that's where it went. That's how it took as long as it did.
So, but you actually had finished it by 2016, did you say?
Well, yes, the essence of the novel had been written by 2016, and it's been edited 3 times, and it hasn't substantively changed. It's just gotten stronger and tighter with every edit. I don't mind it at the, when that's happening to you and it's taking longer, and you're saying, oh, it's coming in the spring. Oh, it's coming in the fall. Oh, it's coming next spring. There is a little bit of a boy who cried wolf feeling that you get. But at the end of the day, I'm not sorry that got edited as many times as it did, because it's definitely, it's just definitely tighter and stronger.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk specifically about the book. So Cambium Blue is set in 1995 at the start of the pine beetle infestation in BC. Why did you choose that pine beetle infestation as kind of a backdrop for the novel?
Part of it is just about timing. That was what was happening, and part of it was that was the beginning of the end for a lot of the smaller mills in BC. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but the consolidation that went on after, sort of in the decade following the beginning of the beetle infestation, right? Small mills all over the province lost their, or small towns all over the province lost their mills. And so it just seemed like a logical place to start with that, even though in Beauty Creek that's not necessarily what's going on, because it's just starting. But the fact that we know, because we're in 2020, we know that they don't get their sawmill back.
Right.
We know that that major employer does move on, and they don't. Yeah.
Right. The jacket design. So I took a look at your previous novel. This one is the design is a lot different. So the book is larger. The font size is larger. It has a kind of a modern, cutting edge sort of look to it, and there's a lot of style items in this. I think it adds to the pleasure of reading it.
Oh, good.
In the ways that you've done it here, because it really just helps. I don't know. It just helps with the overall presentation. Cambium Blue. So I've already actually, when I mentioned to people I'd be talking to you, they were saying, "What is the title all about?" So I don't know a whole lot about trees, but I know that cambium is a wood layer just kind of underneath the bark. Can you tell people what cambium blue is? Because that's a really unique thing.
Well, the pine beetle, when a pine beetle attacks a tree, it burrows into the cambium layer. I'm guessing that the tree people and the foresters might have some trouble with me calling it just the cambium layer, because there's more to it than that, but we're going to go with the cambium layer. So the beetles, they burrow in and they bring a fungus with them, and that fungus makes the cambium easier for them to eat, and that fungus stains the wood blue. So, so pine beetle wood has a blue tinge to it. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No, not in person, but I've seen pictures of it.
Yeah, so it has a blue tinge to it. So that's and the other thing about the cambium layer is, of course, that's the nutrients of the tree. So when the beetles chew through the cambium layer, and the tree dies.
So do you feel that on your book tour, this will be the question you're asked the most? What does this title mean?
Possibly, although I think cambium, I think for people who are sawmill people, forestry people, forest people, they will understand. And the blue of the pine wood, I think people will understand. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the story. So there are three strong protagonists in this with kind of intertwined stories that go through. I think you write characters really, really well. You bring them to life. Lots of interesting details, strengths, a lot of their weaknesses, their quirks. They're not perfect people, but they're people, right?
Right, thank you.
And I think you really bring them to life by doing that way. So I want to talk about the characters in this book. I'm kind of a linear guy, so I'm reading a book and I'm going, where's the story? I don't get it. But it's really three stories and they're kind of juggled, right? As you go back and forth. So let's talk about the characters and introduce people to the characters. So first of all, you have Stevie Jeffers, who is a 24-year-old widow, mother of two young girls. Tell us a little bit about her. What can you tell us about Stevie that...
Stevie was married very young. She was a very young mother, so she's in lots of ways she's still a child, even though she's been thrust into adult situations as a young woman. So she's struggling to find her own way and her own voice and to make up her own mind, things that she hasn't been able to do until now. Right. And her decision to stay in Beauty Creek, she's moved there with her common law husband, who she got together with after her first husband was killed, and he's come for a job in the mill, and they're going to have a lovely life where he's going to go to work at the mill and come home evenings, and they're going to have an ordinary life, and the sawmill closes, and so he's going to go off to camp, and they're going to move, and she says no, she's not moving again. She's promised her girls that they won't have to move, they won't have to change schools, so she makes a decision for herself, and that's where we open with Stevie. It's that this is her first time making a decision for herself, standing up for herself, deciding for herself, and being terrified by doing that, right? Because she's
24, right?
Yeah, and she's cutting loose the things that have supported her up until now. Yeah, so that's Stevie.
Right, and she's very much the conscience, I think, of in a lot of ways to what's happening in the various stories here. She seems to be how everybody kind of revolves around, at least in my interpretation of it. She was sort of the center of it, while dodging the judgment of the town folk for being, married at a young age with two young girls and no discernible skills, and all the things that you hear about life. So yeah, she's a real fascinating character. Then you have Nash Malone. So Nash Malone is the local junk collector, I guess, is what you would call it, although to him it's things he's going to fix up and do things with. Veteran of the Spanish Civil War, which is very unusual. You don't hear stories about people that were in the Spanish Civil War. And he's called the Poet Laureate of Beauty Creek because he's a nice, writes beautiful poetry. Where did that character come from? Because it's a
Well, that character it was inspired by an actual person. That character was inspired by a man that I knew from the newspaper days. He brought poetry to be published in the newspaper. Okay. He was a local man who had gone to Spain, which I didn't know anything about and had never heard of. Somewhat like Stevie in the book, had no clue about the Spanish Civil War. And so that always just sort of stayed with me, a curiosity that I had about how, about the Spanish Civil War, about what that meant, about what that was about. And it was also tied into the Depression, right? And the lack of opportunities for young men during the Depression and how that played out. And right. So I was always curious about that. And yeah, so it just became this character who's not. So I used those elements of the real character. So there's the poetry, right. And there's the junk collecting, and there's the having been to Spain. But that's all of the real. Everything else about the character is complete fabrication because right. I didn't know the actual vet at all to speak of. So yeah, so that's where Nash came from, and then his personality really grew out of all the things I read. Like I read a lot about the Spanish Civil War. I read a lot of. And there's a lot to read because it has really been, it's been studied a lot. So there's a lot of books about it. And there are 3 really great Canadian books about the people who went to Spain and what that was like. And then of course there is Hemingway and Orwell, and right, there's a lot of mythos around the Spanish Civil War. And so I read, and then I let that sort of incubate in my mind, and that became Nash Malone. Right.
I found a lot of similarities between the stories of Nash and the Spanish Civil War and Vietnam veterans, and how when they came home it was kind of the forgotten war, and they were not really appreciated for what they had done or even lauded for what they had done more. They were not shunned, but not talked about.
Yeah, very much. Thing, right? Yeah, I think probably, and the people who went to Spain, they were shunned when they came home. People didn't. It was just the beginning, shortly after the Second World War, the beginning of the Cold War. So anything that smacked of communism, even a Canadian kind of version, which was a different thing than a Russian kind of version, it was just not. Yeah, people did. They did shun them, and they did judge them, and they didn't understand why they went and what they were there for. And
right.
Yeah.
And he's kind of the conflict character that's mired in conflict with the community, the Beauty Creek right. town administration, and they want to make an example of him, I guess, to beautify Beauty Creek even more for the potential investors, sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and that part of the character has to do with my. You see stories all the time about an individual in a town coming up against the bureaucracy. So it'll be somebody built a tree fort in the front of their lot instead of the back, or somebody got a bench built to remember somebody and they put it somewhere without authorization, or
right. Very common story.
It's a very common story. It is a very common story, that idea of the individual and the bureaucracy, and and I just wanted to explore that idea of maybe sometimes the bureaucracy needs to bend.
And I think the element of whether the neighbors and other residents came to his aid or didn't come to his aid, and the personality of it, and the communist kind of thing, and all that sort of a very interesting backstory, interesting story woven through.
And it's that thing about people. They're always more than we think they are.
Right. Yeah. Many layers. I got that. And then the third main character is Maggie Evans, who's coincidentally another widow. Her husband was the publisher of the struggling small town newspaper. A woman who, again, doesn't really know where she belongs at this point in her life, I think, from what I saw. Maybe just a little bit of you in there, not the not belonging part, but the newspaper publishing.
The
and
newspaper part.
world.
Like the newspaper part was a world that was familiar to me, and so that was a world that was familiar for me, and it's an interesting place because you are dealing with all the people in the town in a small newspaper.
Right.
In a community weekly, you are always dealing with everybody in the town all of the time.
Focal point.
And you're sort of mediating the conversation the town is having with itself and all of those kinds of things. And I think it's a really important job that local weeklies do. I really do. And then it was just fun to have a character that part of it's about the idea of what it is to be a woman after you leave the structure of a marriage or a dependent relationship. What does that mean? What does that look like? How does that happen? And yes, I'm just curious about that. And those sort of feisty, independent women that get things done. And yeah, I'm just interested in that story.
Right, and you hear this story in Valemount all the time. Will I get my business to a certain place, then sell it and leave and go somewhere else, or will I, tackle this adventure head on and kind of do it? So again, a lot of layers in those characters as well.
The other thing about Maggie that I kind of wanted to talk about was the idea of, because she had grown up in Beauty Creek, and so and had come home when her husband fell in love with Beauty Creek and the idea of running a paper. And so she'd come home begrudgingly and not wanting to stay. And for lots of people who grow up in the small towns in the interior, there is very much that idea that that's not where life happens.
Right.
That life is somewhere outside, some other place. And yeah, so Maggie's arc brings her to the place where she can see that she can actually make a difference where she is.
Yeah, I've run into a few people in my time in Valemount that's happened to. They've gone away, or they've been away and they've come back and they said, yeah, I realize now what I had when I was here was what I needed all along. Right?
Yeah.
So, that's kind of interesting. I found that there was a kind of a sadness woven through all these characters. A sense that, I think you mentioned it earlier, that none of them are really sure of their path in life at the time we encounter them in this particular story. What were you trying to say about that in or through the lens, I guess, of your writing about each of them?
Well, I guess some of it is about the loss is in when you live a long way out. I have a friend who moved here from the city. This is years ago, but and she said that one of the things that was a surprise to her after 5 or 10 years in Valemount was how many funerals she attended, and that in the city where there's lots and lots and lots of people, you have smaller circles, and when you live in a place like this, you become connected to a lot of people, and you're affected when you lose them, right?
Right.
Every man's, what is it? Loss diminishes me. Something. So yeah, that idea, that's probably in there in the sense that there's logging accidents and there's death and sickness and that's life, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess what I sort of meant, and maybe it's just it makes for more interesting writing and reading for sure. There are no characters who seem happy and satisfied with where they are at the moment. They're all in
Gosh,
transition.
no, we can't
They're
have
all
that.
in transition.
Yes.
Right?
Well, that is part of that is part of certainly if nothing's happening, why would we bother reading it? The sun, it's the sun shone all day, right?
True enough. Sure.
So part of the
It's
fun
the interest of it,
fun
yeah.
of fiction is about what's going to happen next. What is the character? Yeah, is the character going to be able to survive? Is the character going to be able to change? Are they going to be able to navigate?
And sometimes not. Sometimes the answer is no, right?
That's right. Sometimes the answer is no.
Right.
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
It just seemed like there was a layer through all the characters that you could follow, where there was great sadness at times, and then maybe a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, and then sad again. And it was an interesting sphere there, that kind of overarching theme of sadness of it.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a device used in the book where you start it with winter and then you go through the seasons. Why did you decide to do that? What's the purpose of that?
Well, part of that is just about structure, which I didn't know very much about, I have to say, until my first edit. My first editor was a woman named Sue Browning, who actually teaches at UBC, teaches writing for film. And Sue gave me a masterclass in structure and the idea of how it works and how you maintain forward momentum and so it's very much about how do you take the scenes that you've written, the places, the interactions between the characters, and put them into some kind of order that makes sense, that maintains some kind of rhythm. You have to make some choices, otherwise you're just all over the place and the reader can't follow it. Right. So it's a way to sort of structure how you're going to put things together, where you're going to put your pieces, where you're going to Did
you make some decisions based on that and say, this belongs in spring or this belongs in summer?
Oh, absolutely.
You did,
absolutely, yeah. I have a very messy writing method, which comes down to me from W.O. Mitchell. W.O. Mitchell taught at the Banff Center, and he taught what he called Mitchell's messy method of writing, or free fall. And so basically, as a writer in W.O.'s classes, you just sit down at your typewriter and you would just type whatever came. You would just type and type and type and type and type and type all day long. You were writing. Whatever came, you got it down. And then periodically you would hand that in. And I didn't go to a WO workshop, but I went to a workshop with a woman who had written for WO. And then once a week or so, everybody would get together and he would just read these pieces without saying whose they were, but these pieces. And his idea was that you would find your voice, you would find your stories, you would discover through the act of doing the work, you would discover what it is that you had to say. So I had written around these characters a lot, and I had a lot of material. But it didn't really. Yeah, it wasn't perfectly structured. It was far from perfectly structured, and so, yes, there was lots of things that got left out, that got moved, and also that just got left out entirely because there was no place for them.
Right.
One of the problems with that particular way of finding is that you do end up with a lot of material that's not in any kind of order. So you might have some really gripping scenes, but they have no chronology. So, right? And so then the business of trying to put that together into a story that flows.
As a workable timeline or something.
You have to have, your characters have to Yeah, you can't find out that, oh my goodness, too bad this character's only 5 in this year. All those kind of details have to be worked out.
So how do you, just to delve a little bit more into your process, do you work, like some writers work backwards? You know, they know how this is going to come out in the end, and they work backwards from that. What is your approach to this? Or is it more, you know, I'm just writing from these characters' points of view and see where it goes?
Yeah, it's very, it's very, very fluid. I do free fall, so I still use free fall a lot. So if I'm writing well, which I haven't been for a while, but if I'm working, then every morning I go to the studio, I sit down, I put my hands on the keyboard, and I write for 1,000 words or an hour. That's kind of my one good hour is and I might get a couple of, you know, usable paragraphs out of that.
Right.
Or a scene, or the beginnings of a scene, or a place I might want to go. And so I'll do that for quite a while. But at the same time that I'm doing that, there's a parallel process where I'm thinking about, because I now know that you can't just do that you will eventually have to have a chronology. So I do sort of that in the morning time is a really good creative time for me. So I do the free fall then, and then later in the day I might work on chronologies or character details. I build fairly extensive character sketches just because that helps me to understand who the character is, when they were born, when they started school, who they went to school with. I mean, So
for you, it doesn't necessarily end up in the book.
It doesn't necessarily end up in the book, and yet it kind of always does end up in the book because, So Hemingway said, if you don't know a thing and you leave it out, it leaves a hole and the reader notices. But if you know a thing and you leave it out, it's still there. So knowing that all of those things that I know about a character are, even though I don't maybe specifically use them, I may not specifically use anything, it's part of my understanding of them.
Right.
Yeah.
So you don't work from an outline at all? You kind of...
No, not really. Organic, I call it.
Very challenging.
Well, it's just, and I mean, I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to create fiction. I mean, I'm still learning how.
What did you learn from book 1 to book 2 to book 1?
Oh, I learned a lot. I learned a lot. Being edited 3 times, I learned a lot. I really did. I learned so much about character and arcs and the way energy moves in a scene. Not that I get it perfectly all the time, but understanding why something either works or doesn't work. I learned a lot about my own writing style. For example, I spent quite some time with my find function, you know, on a Microsoft Word document. You can go find. So you can find, for example, the word shrug. And if you have 88 shrugs, that's too many. Right? And so, and by doing that, I began to learn what, so that would be in a scene, I would have a character would be shrugging. And that was always because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have a clear enough understanding about what was the dynamics that were going on in that particular moment in time. And so I was covering it with a shrug, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, that. And so, I learned a lot from being edited, a lot from people saying, so why is this here? And going, oh, you noticed.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah.
There's another, I don't want to call it a device, but there's another technique you use throughout the book, starting about halfway through. It's pages that we see written in a typewriter font. Always about the experiences of a boy. Never talked about who it is or what it is. You never really say it, but are these pages from Nash's unpublished, unread novel that he gave to Stevie.
Well, you see, this is the thing. What do you think is the question?
Right.
What do you think they are?
Well, I guess that's what I think.
There you
that's
go.
Why I asked
There
the
you
question.
go. Yeah.
So it's a very interesting thing. You come to these pages, and there's as the book goes along, there's more and more of them, and you're going, this is really an interesting fourth part of the story here, right?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
I want to read one of them because I think it's worthwhile for me to read them. I'd get you to read them, but you're going to be doing that a lot, so
Oh, okay.
I thought I would read them.
You go ahead.
This one reads, "The boy never completely understands what drew him, pushed him, bore him to Spain. The moment of decision remains a kaleidoscope of contradictory fragments, constantly shifting. He went to Spain to avenge his brother. He went to Spain to escape his past. He went to Spain to belong. He went to Spain to stand apart. He went to Spain to live. He went to Spain to die. In the end, all he could be certain of was the journey. Everything he thought he believed, everything he thought he was fighting for, became a distant, childish memory, tinged with wood smoke and the scent of the rough pine poles they had used to erect the tents in the camps. The slogans, the songs, the chants remained only fragments of rhythm, snatches of a chorus he would hum to himself, when the poignant notes of a Spanish guitar defied the roar of the bombers and drifted over the shattered stone wall that sheltered him." To me, as I said, this is Nash's story, but not necessarily. But it is definitely that story of once again trying to find your way. Why are you doing something? Where are you going? What is the purpose of this? And what you bring from those experiences, and that's through everybody's story in this book. And you see a lot of these, and I think it's a really, it cheapens it to say device, but I think it's a really interesting technique that kind of makes you stop and think every once in a while, rather than just reading the book. And I really enjoyed that.
I'm glad.
I thought it was really
great. One of the things I can tell you about it is that one of the things about Mitchell's messy method is that you do end up with quite a lot of fragments with which you can do things like that.
There you go. There is a method to the madness.
Yeah, so.
I get the sense of the poet that Nash is in these snippets all the way through. And that's why, to me, those are his story. That's his writing. What are you trying to say with those snippets through the book? What's? I mean, other than it just being I've written a lot, so I'm going to put some of these in. I tend to believe you must have another reason for putting them in.
It's very for me. It's very intuitive, my sense of what should come next or what would be good here. And that's not just in terms of the whole structure of the novel, that's in terms of in a sentence.
Right.
My sense of it, and it's a little bit about the sound. So it's not just about the words, it's about the sound of the words. And it's very intuitive. It's very much, it's just what I think. I think that this is what should happen. I think that this is what should go there. I think that this will work. And I don't think that I'm especially attached to what the reader takes from it. In the sense that I'm not trying to get you to think a thing. I'm not trying to make a point or even necessarily an argument. I might be trying to raise a question, like give you something to think about or give the reader something to think about, but I'm not particularly attached to what your answer is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that. And it's also interesting the way it builds. It starts with a sentence or a sentence fragment, and then there's a little more and a little more and it gets longer and it gets more, perhaps more poetic, more thought-provoking kind of thing as the book goes along, which I think is a really interesting way to do it, because first you wonder, what does that mean? Why is that there? Right? And then as you start to see more of them, you're going, okay, I'm kind of absorbing my own thing out of this, right?
I'll tell you a little insider story about that, because when the book went to the proofreader, when it came back, she said, I don't know why you've they weren't in that particular font. They were in a slightly different font than the rest of the book, but they weren't in that particular font. And the proofreader thought that it was just distracting that they were in a different font, and she thought they should just flow together. But both I and someone else in charge of such things thought that they could actually be even more standalone, and so that's why they ended up as they are.
It's very much, I'm certain that people are not going to be able to see it from the cameras where they are here.
It's very much a typewriter.
Yeah, it's a different font. It's a typewriter, an old school way of writing, which you establish Nash is doing in there. But it's also somewhat distressed too, as are the chapter numbers in there, which I think is, whether or not you thought about it as adding to the story, I think it does.
I'm glad.
Right? Yeah. So that's one of those things I mentioned earlier about the style of it bringing you kind of around, and you can even kind of see the way they've done your name and on the jacket.
It's the same.
Right?
And that's the font, right?
Yeah,
that's the one. Yeah.
So these are people that know what they're doing. Eh? They
paid very close attention to the details, and it's wonderful. Yeah.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about, or that you want to talk about the contents of the book before we get on to other things?
No, I think you've covered it. Yeah. No,
Okay.
I'm happy.
All right. I understand that you're planning a reading.
Yes.
You want to tell people about that?
The reading is going to be Thursday, March the 10th at the Valemount Community Theatre,
Okay.
7 p.m. There's no charge. You'll need to wear a mask and bring your Vax passport. It's being hosted by Vax and the Valemount Public Library. And I will be doing a bit of reading. Sharon Stearns is going to host with me, and so we're going to chat about books and writing, and I'll read a little bit, and then after we're done, I will sign some books in the lobby. So
Wonderful.
If you've already got your copy, you can bring it and I'll sign it, and I'll also have books for sale.
Wonderful. So Thursday, March the 9th.
10th.
March the 10th. I got that. March the 10th at the Valemount Secondary School Theatre.
Yep, there we go. Sorry, yep, in the theatre.
Yeah, it should be great.
Should be fun, yeah.
Should be a lot.
A public event, imagine.
Yeah, yeah, nice. What's next for you? I know that's a hard question to answer when you're in the middle of launching something now.
Yeah, right now I'm busy with thinking about the launches, and I'm going to do a tour of the Columbia Basin at the end of April, the beginning of May. I'm going to go probably through the Caribou for a little mini tour. I've been asked to come to TRU because I took the open learning courses. I'm an Open University alumna. And so TRU is now in charge of administering the Open University. So we're going to do something at TRU. So it's all quite busy with doing book promotion kinds of things. But I am thinking about the next novel. It is sort of in my brain working around. I have done some free-falling already about it. I have an idea what I'm going to do. I don't say it's going to be another novel set in the interior of BC with interesting characters, but I don't talk very much about what my projects will be. I find it just it diminishes the energy somehow if I over talk it.
Sure.
I'm just not that. I know for some people it's really helpful to talk about it, but I've learned through experience that I'm not one of those. So. Yeah, that's
right.
What's coming.
Let it evolve. Yeah.
It just has to be. It has to grow in the dark.
Well, I know people eagerly anticipated this, and I talked to a few people, and they said, "I can't wait to read it to find out if I'm in the book." Right? Because I remember that was the story when Logger's Daughters came out. Everybody's like, "Oh, am I in it? Am I in it?" Right. And you probably have that a lot.
I have a funny story about that I like to tell. I have a friend who said to me, "Maureen, I better not be in your book." And I said, "Oh, don't worry. If you were in the book, you wouldn't recognize yourself. You'd say, 'Who's that jerk?'"
Right. Yeah. I better not be in your book, but I hope I am.
Yeah. Nobody is in the book. Although I'm sure people will find pieces.
Right.
This is the way that I explain it to people who find things that they're sure they know. Alice Walker likened writing fiction to quilting with scraps. So, in a lifetime of human interactions, I have collected a big basket of scraps, right? And I draw on that to create characters. So it won't be surprising if a reader goes, that scrap is from my grandmother's skirt, right?
Yeah. Sure.
Or I've seen Maureen wear that shirt, or something like that. But those scraps will only be one tiny part of this imaginary whole. But yeah.
Yeah, I hope you congratulate me for not, bringing that part of the story in. I was very conscious that you don't really want to talk about that kind of stuff. Who's in the book? Who, what's this person? However, I will say this for people, specifically for people in Valemount, there are a lot of similarities to things that either have happened here in the past, are happening now, or may happen in the future.
It's true.
So please get out there and read it. It's a very interesting way to take things that are happening and kind of bounce them around and come up with something completely different, but still the same, right? Still very familiar. Yeah.
It could really be, if you think about it, any town in the interior. There's a lot of similarities in the issues and the personalities and the stuff that goes on.
Right.
Yeah. But yes, I'm sure people will find themselves there.
Yeah, wonderful. Once again, Cambium Blue, it will be available on March the 9th, I think is the
available.
launch date. It's available now.
It really is available now.
You can pick it up right now. Don't wait, get it now. It's a wonderful book. It's a really interesting experience, and you'll have trouble putting it down. So thank you very much, Maureen.
Thank you.
And all the best with this book and all your future writings.
Thank you very much.